The original write-up had a few errors, including an incorrect birthplace. Searching in Japanese doesn't reveal much more than, in English, this person is nearly a ghost. To learn more about him, old Japanese books had to be purchased, several hundred relevant pages translated, and the story pieced together. He was born on the 27th of January, 1966, on Kyushu Island, in the Hakata district of Fukuoka. His father, a manga fan who worked for NHK, moved the family frequently Nagano, Nagasaki, Yamanashi, Tokyo, making it hard for him to form friendships. Drawing manga became his way to connect, and he stood out for his talent, especially with popular characters like those from Gundam. He and classmates created collaborative manga stories, filling notebooks with hundreds of pages, many of which he still keeps. In his teens, he became fascinated with arcades and video game trivia. One day, he discovered an amateur video game magazine called Game Freak, full of insights and trivia he loved. Though the content impressed him, the visuals didn't, so he sent in some of his artwork and was welcomed by the magazine's young creator, Satoshi. They became fast friends, meeting in person at an arcade trade show in Tokyo. After graduating a year earlier than Satoshi, he left home to pursue his dream of becoming a manga artist. With little money, he moved into a cheap apartment in Machidako, incidentally near where Satoshi lived. Satoshi soon moved his equipment in, and the apartment became their new Game Freak workspace. Living on ramen and video games, they eventually bought a Famicom and got hooked on Super Mario, with a particular fondness for Princess Peach that continues to this day. The hard truth is that this theory doesn't stand up to scrutiny. Half of the supposed evidence is false, and the other half is made up of vague coincidences that apply to many other Pokemon as well. Recently, dozens of interview pages were translated where Satoshi Tajiri and Shigeki Morimoto discussed Mew in great detail. They talked about hidden phantom Pokemon, fictional creatures, and many behind-the-scenes facts, but Ditto was never mentioned. The Ditto Mew theory has been around for ages, so let's move on to a more recent rumor that Professor Ivy is a lesbian, or more accurately, that the original head writer of the anime, Takeshi Shudo, supposedly imagined her that way. This idea existed in fan discussions for years, but it only gained widespread attention in 2020 after a Twitter user named Crimson posted a viral tweet claiming it as fact. Soon after, several media outlets such as Game Rant, Flipboard, Pink News, Pride.com, Comicbook.com, and countless Reddit and Twitter threads picked it up. To give an example of how these sites treated the rumor as fact, Comicbook.com stated that the information came from Pocket Monsters, the animation, a book written by Shudo before he died. The article claimed Shudo believed Ivy was a lesbian, explaining Brock's emotional reaction after leaving her. Crimson, the Twitter user who made the claim go viral, said he often saw the rumor on message boards and assumed it was true. He only had a few hundred followers and posted the tweet without expecting it to spread. When it did go viral, many fans were excited, but a few asked for a source. Crimson then said it came from Shudo's book, although he had never actually read it. After facing criticism, he deleted the tweet, realizing it might not be true and not wanting to spread misinformation. As part of a fact-checking process, the actual books, the animation, and its sequel were reviewed. These are mostly just novelizations of the early anime and end before the Orange Islands arc, meaning Professor Ivy isn't in them at all. For thoroughness, all 20,026 entries of Takeshi Shudo's personal blog were also reviewed. While he goes into great detail about his work on the show, he never mentions Professor Ivy's sexuality. The news outlets that shared the story didn't verify it and never issued corrections. Crimson admitted his tweet didn't have a strong source and felt the sites just wanted attention by spreading something potentially untrue. Despite the original tweet being deleted, the rumor continued to circulate. A few months ago, another user named Dragon Mills reposted a screenshot of Crimson's tweet, making it go viral again with nearly 60,000 likes and over 8,000 shares. Crimson warned Dragon Mills that the claim was likely false, but the warning was ignored. Japanese fan communities were also checked. The earliest mention of Ivy being a lesbian appeared on an old 2002 message board, where users were just speculating without citing any official source. A more recent post cited the rumor, but attributed it to non-Japanese fans online. No one provided a credible source, and most of what turned up in Japanese searches was explicit fan content. Fans are free to imagine what they want, but there's no evidence in the show or from Shudo suggesting that Ivy was meant to be a lesbian. Extensive fact-checking was done for this video, but it's possible that official statements are out there in obscure Japanese publications. To cover all bases, a $350 reward is being offered for each myth if someone can provide a direct quote from Takeshi Shudo or a core developer confirming it. 3 myths were examined in this video, so there's a total of $1,050 on the line. Some of the most iconic and cherished characters in history started with a comic created by Charles Schulz in 1950. Peanuts became known as the longest story ever told by a single person and was adapted into movies, television shows, and toys, much like how Pokemon became. However, in the early 2000s, Schulz was diagnosed with cancer, and his comic writing career came to an end. Pokemon's executives saw an opportunity and quickly began planning to fill the gap left by Peanuts. With over 2,000 newspapers across America, at least 200 were left with empty spots to fill. While serialization profits were low, the royalties from compilation books were significant, and Pokemon recognized the marketing potential in filling those spaces. With Schultz's death imminent, they knew the window for this opportunity was closing fast. The Pokemon Company president, Tsunekazu Ishihara, inquired about the power of these newspapers, and the answer was clear: they were influential. The executives decided that the exposure would be equivalent to $2 billion in advertising, just for those 200 newspapers, and if they could take over all 2,000, it could generate billions more. Along with their games, anime, and trading cards, these comics could become the 4th pillar of their strategy to dominate the Western market. Just 1 week after their meeting, Charles Schulz passed away, and the Pokemon Company had to move quickly. They hired Gerard Jones, a respected writer known for his work with Marvel and DC Comics, as well as the English versions of Pokemon Adventures and Dragon Ball, believing he was the perfect fit. To handle the art, they brought in Ashura Benimaru ETO, who had worked on comics for Super Metroid, Earthbound, and Star Fox, as well as various Pokemon art, including work on Pokemon Snap. Ashura, known for his eccentric personality and rockstar status, was also an executive at Creatures Inc., a co-owner of the Pokemon brand. With such seasoned professionals, the new Pokemon comic seemed destined for success. Alongside Jones and Ashura was a 3-person editorial team with additional support from Nintendo Creatures Inc., Viz, and Creator Syndicate. The first comic strip debuted a few months later, featuring Ash, Misty, and Pikachu on their first day at school, where they learned subjects like history and U.S. government. Other characters like Brock, Ash's mom, and Gary appeared regularly, with some Pokemon, like Pikachu and Metapod, featured more prominently. The comics were printed in color on Sundays and black and white during the week, with hidden Pokemon in each strip. Sunday editions also included puzzles such as word searches or Who's That Pokemon? One major feature was the serialized storylines, like Ash preparing for a battle against Gary, or recurring subplots such as Misty's crush on Ash and Brock's awkward flirtations with women. Some of the more notable strips include Brock practicing flirting with his Vulpix, and a storyline where Ditto transforms into a woman and is catcalled by Brock, even after being revealed as Ditto. The most original and ongoing plotline was Metapod's deep, philosophical reflections on his immobility. However, despite the star-studded team and interesting ideas, the comics weren't particularly funny or engaging. With few exceptions, they were generally considered subpar. The comic, created by Charles Schulz in 1950, introduced some of the most iconic and cherished characters of all time. Peanuts was often called the longest story ever written by a single person. It was adapted into movies, television shows, toys, and more. But tragically, in the early 2000s, Schulz was dying from cancer, and his days of writing the comic were coming to an end. At the same time, Pokémon's corporate leaders saw an opportunity and began brainstorming how to take over. With Snoopy's comic ending, many newspapers across America were left with gaps that needed filling. While earnings from daily comics were modest, royalties from collected editions were significant, and Pokémon saw potential in filling this void. At this time, the Pokémon Company's leadership, led by Tsunekazu Ishihara, was eager to capitalize on the situation, knowing the newspapers had immense daily reach. The company figured that even if the comic itself didn't generate large profits, the exposure from appearing in 200 newspapers would be like $2 billion worth of advertising, and the potential value of having the comic in all 2,000 papers was even greater. Pokémon believed this could become a key part of their strategy to succeed in the West, alongside their games, anime, and trading cards. Just a week after this decision, Charles Schulz passed away, and the Pokémon Company had to act quickly. They hired Gerard Jones, a well-respected writer with experience at Marvel and DC Comics, as well as the English versions of Pokémon Adventures and Dragon Ball. For the art, they brought in Ashura Benamaru Eto, a talented artist known for his work on various comics, including Pokémon-related ones. Ashura was also an executive at Creatures Inc., the company behind Pokémon, known for his eccentric personality and bold fashion choices. Despite his quirks, Ashura was a highly skilled artist and a key figure in the Pokémon brand. With seasoned professionals like Jones and Ashura in charge, the new Pokémon comic seemed poised for success. The editorial team consisted of experienced individuals from Nintendo, Creatures Inc., Viz, and Creator Syndicate. The first comic strip debuted a few months later, featuring Ash, Misty, and Pikachu on their first day of school, where they studied subjects like history and US government. Other characters like Brock, Ash's mom, and Gary also appeared regularly, along with various Pokémon, particularly Pikachu and Metapod. The comic was a mix of color Sundays and black and white strips for the rest of the week, with hidden Pokémon in the black and white versions and puzzles in the Sunday editions. The stories were spread out over the course of several weeks, and some ongoing plots included Misty's crush on Ash, Brock's flirtations, and Metapod's philosophical struggles due to his immobility. Despite its effort, the comic didn't quite land. Most of the strips were not very funny or entertaining, with few exceptions, and many felt underwhelming. Do you like this personality? We usually keep our opinions to ourselves, but since many of you may not read the comics beyond this video, we hope you'll understand why we feel the need to put on our reviewer hats. Our critiques align with some of the original criticisms, but we also acknowledge that opinions on what's good or bad can vary. Ultimately, we want you to form your own opinion, so we'll dive into one of the Metapod strips. In it, PYU asks Metapod how it can enjoy being ambivalent, to which Metapod replies that ambivalence frees it from the pressure of having to be sure about its choices. Psyduck, of course, then exaggerates for the camera. While this may not be funny to every especially, since many kids wouldn't even know what ambivalence means, some viewers might find it hilarious. So let's check out another one. Ash and his mum are watching television. The news covers topics like the stock market, the Slovakian embassy, and a presidential inauguration. Before switching to a Pokémon battle, Ash takes out his earplugs and declares, "The secret to life is knowing when to pull out the earplugs." What's interesting is that this entire segment was an attempt by the Pokémon Company to appeal to American adults, which could explain the sometimes complex vocabulary. In 2000, Masakazu Kubo, the so-called father of Pokémon, shared his vision of expanding the brand into American newspapers, hoping it would reach the same iconic status as Peanuts. This was also seen as an opportunity to introduce Pokémon as something for adults, though in reality, these comics might have done the opposite, making adults resent Pokémon. We could read you more, but here's a quick look at two more strips. In one, Ash's mom says, "That does it. My mind is set. I won't let Ash's Pokémon get to me anymore." While Charmander causes chaos in the background, she exasperatedly looks at the reader and comments, "Oh look, my curtains are on fire. Isn't that amusing?" Haha. In another, she lounges on the couch, commenting on how Ash's Pokémon haven't bothered her all hour, and says she'll have to wake up at 3 o'clock a.m. more often. These strips aren't funny and make Pokemon seem irritating. The author, Gerard Jones, wasn't a big Pokemon fan and based much of his knowledge on his son, Nicky, whose interest had shifted to the competition likely Digimon or Yu-Gi-Oh! This lack of familiarity is evident in the work, such as when the Orange Islands are mentioned without clarification, or when Misty says her Staryu evolved from rigorous training, when it actually evolves using a water stone. Additionally, Ash and friends attend regular school, not a Pokemon school, and study things like the 14th Amendment and the Electoral College very odd. The puzzles aimed at adults were also incredibly easy, such as a basic Find the Odd Duo puzzle. One Connect the Dots puzzle, meant to form a Pokemon, ended up looking nothing like any known Pokemon, perhaps a deformed Meowth. As much as we admire Ashuro's artistic talent, his style often clashed with what was expected in American comics, resulting in some awkward moments, like when Pikachu winks at the reader. The art also feels rushed, with empty spaces in the background where there should have been color. In a meeting with Ishihara and other executives, they expressed concern that the quality of the comics would suffer due to time constraints. Someone mentioned that they wanted to put out good content but didn't have the time, while Kubo remained optimistic, stating that the restrictions would serve as motivation. We already have the characters and the game story, he said. History shows that nearly every product with the Pokemon brand on it is bound to be a financial success. However, this particular comic was the rare exception. The storytelling was drawn out, with storylines often taking weeks to reach a conclusion, and even when they did, the payoff rarely justified the wait. For example, after Ash loses to Gary, Clefairy spends 3 weeks feeling guilty, hiding in a cupboard, crying, and seeking reassurance. Eventually, Ash's other Pokemon throw a party to cheer it up, but by that point, readers have probably forgotten why Clefairy was upset in the first place. The comic seems aware of this, as the characters can't even recall the reason. At one point, Bulbasaur turns to the audience and remarks, "Too bad we didn't clip and save those strips." The comic was cancelled shortly afterward, and Team Rocket made their only appearance in the final issue. Ash then directly addresses the reader, saying, "I guess we won't be seeing you in the funny papers anymore." Long story short, it was a failure. It didn't appeal to American adults, and likely didn't resonate with kids either. It certainly didn't generate the expected billions for the executives. The comic only lasted 6 months, from September 2000 to March 2001. Things took a darker turn years later when the comic's writer, Gerard Jones, was arrested for possessing and distributing illegal materials. It turned out to be something far more serious than comics, involving content that leads to federal prison sentences. He had been doing this for years, and even uploaded some of it to a private YouTube channel, which ultimately led to the authorities being notified. After serving time, Jones is now a free man. While we typically reach out to creators for behind-the-scenes insights, this time we decided to pass. The Pokemon Company has never acknowledged this comic, and fans have shown no interest in keeping its memory alive. In fact, we couldn't find any YouTube videos or tweets about it, not even the usual "on this day in Pokemon history" posts. The last mention was over a year ago by someone who wished people would talk about it more. Well, here it is, Jimmy. If anyone is interested in revisiting this forgotten comic, it's available on the Internet Archive for free. Although we've been critical, we understand some might have nostalgia for it, so we hope those fans can still find enjoyment in it. On a lighter note, did you know that fans predicted the announcement of Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver a week before their official reveal? The Japanese television show Pokemon Sunday teased a big announcement, and viewers quickly noticed 2 confetti-filled balls behind the presenter sewn gold and 1 silver. Given the past success of Fire Red and Leaf Green, fans correctly guessed that the next remakes would be of gold and silver. Perhaps because of this, Nintendo decided to reveal the games 3 days early. The development of Heart Gold and Soul Silver was shaped by the success of previous Pokemon games. Initially, the team didn't think the series would continue beyond Gold and Silver, assuming the franchise's popularity would fade. But the success of those games proved the series' staying power, leading to the founding of the Pokemon Company by Tsunekazu Ishihara who would manage the brand and marketing moving forward. Despite their eventual success, Heart Gold and Soul Silver weren't without their difficulties. Delays caused by the development of Blue and Yellow games affected the original Gold and Silver production. To fill the gap, Ishihara approved the release of Pocket Pikachu, a pedometer where Pikachu's happiness increased as the player walked more. Later, an enhanced version was released called Pocket Pikachu Color. Ishihara was also involved in creating a pedometer bundled with the 2008 Nintendo DS game Personal Trainer, Walking. Ishihara even used the pedometer with his dog, but after losing it during a walk, he found it a month later still working despite being submerged in a puddle. This impressed him so much that he wanted to include it in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, leading to the creation of the Pokewalker. This pedometer allowed players to walk with their Pokemon in-game, and it became a spiritual successor to the original Pocket Pikachu. Moves numbered 468, 469, or 470 are designed to function as special attacks with a base power and accuracy of 110 pp. However, using moves numbered higher than 470 causes the game to crash, hinting that at least 3 additional moves were originally planned. Many files related to the underground feature from Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum are present in the data of Heart Gold and Soul Silver, indicating that this feature might have been intended for reintroduction. There are also 2 unused items in the game's files. One is a photo album that was meant to store pictures taken by the player, but since the final version saves photos to the PC, the album was unnecessary. The other item, known as the lock capsule, is described in-game as being unlocked only with a special key. When hacked into the game, it has no function. Initially, it was planned to be transferred to Pokemon Black and White, where the player could bring it to Mr. Locke in Castelia City to receive a TM for the move Snarl. Players who obtained the legendary Pokemon Arceus via special distribution in Heart Gold and Soul Silver could access the Sinnoh Ruins, where they could choose a level 1 Palkia, Dialga, or Giratina. It is also possible to visit the COO Ruins a second time, but only with a second Arceus obtained from an unused in-game event in Pokemon Diamond and Pearl. This second visit is normally impossible unless the game is modified. When this event is triggered, a hiker greets the player with new dialogue, and the player can receive the Pokemon they did not choose initially. Heart Gold and Soul Silver were programmed with anti-piracy protection, freezing the game when played on an emulator, preventing the player from entering a Pokemon battle and leaving their Pokeballs spinning. Pikachu's name is derived from 2 Japanese onomatopoeic words, Pika, Pika, which imitates the sound of electricity sparking, and Choo-Choo, the sound of a mouse squeaking. Pikachu's evolution, Raichu, is named after Rai, the Japanese word for thunder, and Chu. Despite Pikachu's widespread fame, it wasn't initially meant to be Pokemon's mascot. During the pre-production of the anime, Pikachu was chosen as the central character because it was popular enough to appeal to both boys and girls. It wasn't the original creator's idea, but was influenced by public feedback. The first manga adaptation, Pokemon Pocket Monsters, which predates the anime by about 5 months, featured Clefairy as the protagonist, not Pikachu. According to Joseph Tobin's book, Pikachu's Global Adventure, Clefairy was chosen for its appeal, but Pikachu's success in focus tests made it the eventual mascot. Its yellow color, being a primary color, was also thought to make it more visible and recognizable to younger audiences, with less competition from other yellow characters. Surprisingly, Pikachu was not designed by the series artist Ken Sugimori, but by Atsuko Nishida, who also helped design around 30 other original Pokemon. Pikachu's voice was initially planned to be more varied, with the character meant to learn Japanese over time, much like a baby. These ideas were later scrapped, and Pikachu now communicates primarily by saying parts of its name, with unique phrases like Pika-Pi, meaning Satoshi, Ash's Japanese name. Pikachu's voice actress, Ikue Tani, was initially disappointed by the lack of a speaking role, believing she was auditioning for Meowth's role. Despite her initial frustration, she later appreciated that her voice was heard by audiences worldwide. Her voice is also featured in Pokemon Stadium 1 and 2 as an Easter egg, replacing the usual cry when a player imports Pikachu from Pokemon Yellow. Eventually, Pikachu did gain the ability to speak, but with limited vocabulary. Moves numbered 468, 469, or 470 function as special attacks with 110 base power and accuracy, and they have usable PP. Using moves numbered above 470 causes the game to crash, suggesting that at least 3 more moves were once planned. Additionally, data from Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum related to the underground feature is present in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, indicating it was considered for a return. 2 unused items are hidden in the game's files: a photo album, which was likely intended to store in-game photos, but was made obsolete by the player's PC, and the lock capsule, which has no effect when hacked into the game. The lock capsule was originally meant to be transferred to Pokemon Black and White, where it could be opened by Mr. Locke in Castelia City to obtain a TM for Snarl. If players acquire the legendary Pokemon Arceus through a special event in Heart Gold or Soul Silver, they can access the Sinjoh ruins to choose a level 1 Palkia, Dialga, or Giratina. A second visit is only possible with another Arceus from a separate, unused in-game event in Diamond and Pearl. If hacked to allow this, the player is greeted with new dialogue and can choose one of the remaining Pokemon. Heart Gold and Soul Silver include anti-piracy measures that freeze the game at the start of battles if played on an emulator, causing Pokeballs to spin endlessly. The name Pikachu is not inspired by the Pika rodent, but rather by Japanese onomatopoeia, Pika Pika for an electric spark, and Choo Choo for a mouse squeak. Its evolution, Raichu, combines Rai, Thunder, and Chew. Although Pikachu is now the face of the franchise, this wasn't always planned. According to the series creator, Pikachu became the central figure during anime pre-production because of its appeal to both boys and girls. Pokemon's first manga, Pokemon Pocket Monsters, featured Clefairy as the main partner, and Clefairy might have become the franchise mascot if Pikachu hadn't tested better with audiences. Pikachu's bright yellow color, being a primary color and relatively unique at the time, may have contributed to its appeal. Ken Sugimori finalized Pikachu's illustration, but the character was originally designed by Atsuko Nishida, who helped design about 30 of the original Pokemon. In the anime, Pikachu typically says parts of its name, but Ash's Pikachu uses specific phrases like Pikapi to refer to Ash, Satoshi in Japanese. Originally, Pokemon were meant to learn Japanese over time, with Pikachu speaking like a baby, but this idea was scrapped. Voice actress Ikue Otani, who plays Pikachu, was initially disappointed with the limited lines, but felt rewarded after realizing the global reach of her performance. She mistakenly thought she was auditioning for Meowth and brought the wrong script. Her voice also appears as an Easter egg in Pokemon Stadium 1 and 2, replacing Pikachu's standard cry when imported from Pokemon Yellow. Pikachu eventually learned to speak words in a limited capacity. In the fan-made English trailer of the adventure game, Detective Pikachu, Birth of a New Team, a humorous voiceover of Pikachu was imagined with a deep, comedic tone, as if it were voiced by American actor Danny DeVito. This trailer generated a push for DeVito to voice the character, but he declined, claiming he had never heard of Pokemon. Pikachu's influence extends into real-world phenomena. Each year, the island nation of Niue releases commemorative coins featuring characters from various franchises, aiming to raise global awareness of its economy. In 2001, Pokemon coins were issued featuring Bulbasaur, Charmander, Squirtle, and Pikachu. These coins have become valuable collector's items. In 2016, a mysterious 5-feet Pikachu sculpture appeared overnight in New Orleans' Lower District Garden, likely inspired by the popularity of Pokemon Go at the time. The statue's creator remains anonymous, but the sculpture was later sold for $2,000, with the proceeds going toward restoring park fountains. Pikachu's impact even led to the discovery of a retinal protein named Pikachurin in 2008, found by researchers at the Osaka Bioscience Institute. This protein is crucial for transmitting visual information to the brain, helping track moving objects. The protein was named after Pikachu due to its association with electricity and speed, and its discovery may improve treatments for vision disorders. Pikachu's fame continued to grow, leading to the release of Hey You Pikachu, a Nintendo 64 game that utilized the console's voice recognition unit. Despite the game's success in the US, it was never released in Europe. The American version saw some changes, such as the removal of shoes in certain scenes, as the Japanese custom of removing shoes indoors wasn't as common in the US. When the Nintendo DS was unveiled in 2004, a demo game titled Pikachu DS was shown, drawing comparisons to Hey You Pikachu for its interactive gameplay, now using the DS's touchscreen. In the American television spot for Hey You Pikachu, a girl asks her brother how he can tell Pikachu is male, a feature that was later added to the franchise. Pikachu's move Volt Tackle is called Volteer in the Japanese version, referencing a move used by the protagonist of Game Freak's earlier project Pulseman, Ken Sugimori, a key figure in the creation of Pokemon, once reflected on his life and career, acknowledging that although Pikachu is one of the most recognized fictional characters, it will eventually fade into obscurity like every other Pokemon. Sugimori, who had a lonely childhood and dreamed of being a manga artist, ran away from home to pursue his passion, which eventually led to him becoming the art director of Pokemon, and a franchise that would become one of the most successful in history. Despite the franchise's massive success, Sugimori, nearing 60, had to let go of his dream of being a manga artist, feeling that his art wasn't very good. Although his contributions were crucial to the creation of the Pokemon universe, is this conversation helpful so far? On the page, it shows that he's always buying Peach-themed items, though his favorite Nintendo game was the original Metroid. Ken's artwork helped Game Freak grow, and their self-published magazines became some of the world's first strategy guides, gaining thousands of devoted readers. One issue that explained how to score 10 million points in Xevious was especially influential. You could make an entire documentary about the lives of these two teenagers in the Xevious, then dramatic and lengthy. Taji practically wrote a whole book about it, but that's a topic for another time. For now, it's enough to say Xevious was incredibly important. Taji withdrew from the public eye in the late 90s, but reappeared in 2015 to interview Xevious creator Masanobu Endo. In that interview, Sugimori and Taji both said, Pokemon wouldn't exist without Xevious. Game Freak would never have made their first game without it, and the mystery within Xevious heavily inspired the mysterious atmosphere they wanted for Pokemon. Sugimori said he appreciated how Endo kept things ambiguous in Xevious, so he tries not to give clear answers about Pokemon either. He believes mystery can make things more enjoyable. After meeting the creator of Xevious as teens, the Game Freak team realized legends are just regular people, so they gathered friends and started developing their own game. Their favorite games all revolved around actions like digging, shooting and jumping, so they decided to make a Famicom game about flipping. Taji brought on more people, rented an apartment as an office, and asked Namco Ho, published Xeviosto, publish their first game. Namco agreed, and 3 years later, Quinty was released, selling 200,000 copies, a big success. Every month, Sugimori published a 2-page Quinty manga, though his growing duties at Game Freak made it hard to chase his dream of becoming a full-time manga artist. After Quinty, Game Freak began work on their next project, Capsule Monsters, a small Game Boy game they thought would take 6 months. The idea for Pokemon was born when Sugimori and Taji were playing Dragon Quest II, and Sugimori got 2 rare hats that Taji wanted, but there was no way to trade, and that idea stuck. Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy were the most popular RPGs in the 80s, but there was also a group of young developers creating RPGs with different styles. Pokemon Red and Green came from that movement, almost a counterculture. Their design included over 200 fantasy monsters, which could be captured, battled, and traded using the link cable. Taji pitched the idea to A-Pink, the Nintendo-affiliated studio behind Mother. Producer Tsunekazu Ishihara and Shigeru Miyamoto liked the idea enough to fund it, and signed on as producers. Sugimori said he liked drawing kaiju-style monsters but with a cartoon spin. He hadn't drawn creatures like that before and felt lost, but still managed to create 20 to 30 designs. Their 6-month plan dragged on, and they ran out of money after spending their Quinty profits on equipment. With help from Ishihara and Miyamoto, Game Freak decided to make smaller games to raise funds. Half a year later, they released Yoshi on Famicom and Game Boy, selling 500,000 copies on launch day. Around the same time, they launched Jerry Boy for Super Famicom, earning Sugimori an award for character design. He also made manga for Jerry Boy, Valkyrie no Densetsu, and Shinmao Uin. In 1992, Sugimori directed his first game, Magical Tararuto-kun, for the Sega Genesis, based on a popular manga. Pokémon, then Capsule Monsters, was shelved for 3 years while Game Freak worked on other titles like Mario and Wario and Pulseman. With Pulseman, the now 28-year-old Sugimori returned as director. Pulseman was a direct response to Sonic the Hedgehog, with Sugimori saying, "If Sonic moves at the speed of sound, Pulseman will move at the speed of light." Once they had enough money again, Game Freak jumped back into Capsule Monsters, now renamed Pocket Monsters due to trademark issues. But development was a mess crunch, time was intense, and developers were sleeping at their desks. Eventually, all 3 programmers quit on the same day. It looked like Pokémon was about to die until their composer, Junichi Masuda, promised to learn programming and take over. The page shows that he frequently buys Peach memorabilia, though his favorite Nintendo game was actually the original Metroid. Ken's artwork significantly improved Game Freak's early work, and their doujinshi became some of the first strategy guides in the world, attracting a cult following of thousands. One issue, which detailed how to score 10 million points in Xevious, was particularly influential. The story of these 2 teenagers involved in the Xevious scene is lengthy and dramatic. Taji even wrote an entire book about it, but that's a topic for another time. For now, it's enough to say Xevious was incredibly important. Taji withdrew from public life in the late 90s, but re-emerged in 2015 to interview Xevious creator Masanobu Endo. In the interview, Sugimori and Taji agreed that Pokémon wouldn't exist without Xevious. Game Freak never would have created their first game without it. The mysteries in Xevious strongly influenced the mystery elements in Pokémon. Sugimori noted that Endo's choice to keep things ambiguous made the experience more enjoyable, which inspired his own approach to Pokémon. After meeting Endo as teens, the Game Freak team realized legends were just ordinary people like them. This inspired them to start making a game with friends. Their favorite games all revolved around core actions like digging, shooting, or jumping, so they settled on flipping as the core of their own Famicom game. Taji assembled a team, rented an apartment as an office, and pitched their game to Namco, the same company behind Xevious. Namco agreed, and 3 years later, Quinty was released, selling 200,000 copies, a major success. Sugimori also drew a monthly 2-page Quinty manga, though his growing responsibilities left little time to pursue a full manga career. After Quinty, Game Freak began working on a new project called Capsule Monsters, which they expected to finish in 6 months for the Game Boy. The concept for Pokémon emerged while Sugimori and Taji were playing Dragon Quest II. Sugimori had acquired 2 rare hats, and Taji wanted one, but there was no way to trade, planting the seed for the Pokémon trading mechanic. Back then, traditional RPGs like Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy were hugely popular. Sugimori recalled a parallel movement of young developers creating RPGs with a fresh perspective, and Pokémon Red and Green were part of that trend. The original game design imagined a world with over 200 fantasy creatures that could be captured in capsules, battled, and traded via link cable. Taji pitched the idea to Aping, a Nintendo-affiliated studio known for Mother. The producer, Tsunekazu Ishihara, along with Shigeru Miyamoto, liked the idea and agreed to fund it and serve as producers. Sugimori recalled initially just wanting to draw cartoonish kaiju-style monsters, but admitted he'd never done that before and struggled to come up with about 20-30 designs. The 6-month development stretched on, and the team ran out of money after spending their Quinty earnings on development equipment. With support from Ishihara and Miyamoto, Game Freak created smaller games to raise funds. About 6 months later, they released Yoshi for both Famicom and Game Boy, which sold 500,000 copies on its first day. Around the same time, they released Jerry Boy for Super Famicom, which earned Sugimori an award for character design. He also made manga for Jerry Boy, Valkyrie no Ken, and Shin Maiden Uin. In 1992, Sugimori directed his first game, Magical Tararuto-kun for the Sega Genesis, based on a popular manga. Pokemon was shelved for about 3 years as Game Freak focused on other projects like Mario and Wario and Pulseman. Sugimori, then 28, returned to directing with Pulseman, which was designed as a rival to Sonic the Hedgehog. Sugimori claimed that if Sonic moved at the speed of sound, Pulseman would move at the speed of light. With some financial stability, Game Freak resumed development on Capsule Monsters, now renamed Pocket Monsters due to trademark issues. Unfortunately, the project fell into development hell, with crunch culture taking its toll. The situation worsened when all 3 programmers quit on the same day, nearly bringing the project to a halt until their composer, Junichi Masuda, pledged to learn programming to keep it alive. Not long after their hardware crashdown event that nearly wiped out years of work, the team was left picking up the pieces. Despite the setback, Masuda committed to learning a new operating system to keep the project alive. At that time, Sugimori was functioning as the art director, though he wasn't officially employed by the company. He was still submitting manga to publishers, hoping to become a professional manga artist. However, he realized the project was in danger of collapsing, and the only way forward was for everyone to give their all. That was the day he gave up his manga dreams and joined the team full-time, determined to help his friends reach their goals. New programmers were brought in, including Shigeki Morimoto, who also designed Pokemon like Mankey and Tauros. Another team member, Motofumi Fuji, created some Eevee evolutions. Still, something felt missing. We need more cute ones, Sugimori thought. Since he was designing from a male perspective, he invited a female artist, Atsuko Nishida, to join. She ended up designing many of the most iconic creatures, including Pikachu, Bulbasaur, Charmander, and Squirtle. Each artist had their own style and approach, but in the end, Sugimori revised everyone's work and unified the designs using watercolor art, creating a consistent collection of 150 Pokemon. By the time the game was released in 1996, more than 6 years had passed since Sugimori first sketched the concept. The team hoped to sell 1 million copies, enough to make trading between players feasible. Sales started slow but grew steadily through word of mouth, especially after rumors emerged of a mysterious 151st Pokemon. Sales doubled, then doubled again, eventually reaching the top of Japan's sales charts more than a year after launch. The phenomenon later spread globally, with nearly 50 million copies sold, becoming the best-selling game of all time. In 1999, the scale of the success hit Sugimori personally. While traveling by train from Paris to London, he saw 2 kids playing Pokemon using a link cable stretched across the aisle. As he walked past, they lifted the cable to let him through. That moment made him realize how far the game had come. He never imagined it would grow so large, or that it would one day become an anime or a movie. He later created a manga, and the team quickly began work on the next installment. Sugimori even designed a Pokemon based on his childhood pet bird. New designers were brought in to contribute fresh ideas. As with the first generation, Sugimori redrew all the new designs to maintain a consistent style for the Johto region. The expectations were high, but after a 2-year delay and much effort, the second generation was a massive success, selling another 30 million copies and proving the franchise wasn't a passing trend. However, not everyone could handle the pressure. Although credited as director, one key team member stepped down during development and faded from the public eye. Sugimori became the most recognizable figure from the company. Even he felt burnt out after completing Gold and Silver, later expressing in an interview that while Pokemon's world offered creative freedom, he sometimes felt weary. At 34, he said he still had more he wanted to explore, especially with pixel art. When asked about his favorite creation, he chose not a Pokemon, but Pulseman, a character from an earlier game he directed. In the years that followed, the team accelerated production, releasing Pokemon games more frequently. Sugimori refined his technique, studying biology to better design realistic Pokemon, especially birds. He insisted on outlining by hand with a traditional manga G pen, even in a digital era, because he liked the tactile quality and roughness of hand-drawn lines. Unlike many artists who strive for clean, perfect lines, he preferred a natural look. Though he used a tablet for coloring, he always outlined by hand a practice he cherished, even as the industry evolved. A Pokemon shouldn't be too cute or too cool. For example, Luxray would have looked cooler if its head was smaller and its eyes narrower. If a Pokemon seems too cool, the creator might add something to make it less so, because if it's too cool, it won't connect emotionally with players. Even designs by others were sometimes revised to be less cute or cool, to make them more memorable. The same approach was taken with human protagonists, deliberately making them less cool. During a Gen 3 promotional tour, when asked about Nintendo, the response was that Nintendo is a company they can learn a lot from, especially in style and the creative process. They're a role model. Then, another person said they actually preferred Sega, which made others laugh before clarifying that Nintendo is still a role model. The truth is, he's been a Sega fan since his teens, and the Sega Genesis is his favorite console. His Twitter handle even references a Sega add-on. When Virtual Console came out, the first games he bought were old Sega titles, even though he already owned them, because he loved them so much. When developing Gen 4, he wanted to return to Game Freak's roots with action games like Pulseman and create pixel art unrelated to Pokemon. He directed Drill Dozer for Game Boy Advance and also drew a manga for it. Drill Dozer received review scores similar to Pokemon and was nominated for GBA Game of the Year by Nintendo Power, but its sales were much lower and it ended up being his last directed game. Over time, he reduced his involvement in Pokemon. After serving as series art director from the start, he passed the role to a junior designer for later games. By the time Sunday and Moon came out, he was mostly supervising designs as an observer, mainly directing the Alolan forms of old Kanto Pokemon, though he didn't design them all himself. Meanwhile, he created cover art for Sega 3D Classic Collections, which contained no Game Freak games, purely out of passion. He also published an art book covering his career, with only a small portion dedicated to Pokemon. He's expressed gratitude for Pokemon's success, but also shows signs that he never wanted to be known solely for that. In a candid interview, he admitted he felt he wasn't skilled enough to be a manga artist, and only managed to make a living in art because video games were new and standards were lower in the 1980s. He never thought his art was good, lacked confidence due to not attending art school unlike younger colleagues, and worried about becoming obsolete. Feeling experience was his only advantage. When asked if he still wanted to draw manga, he basically said no, mentioning his last manga works were promotional pieces for Drill Dozer and Pokemon Mystery Dungeon, and he no longer draws in his free time. As for others, one former designer left Game Freak over 10 years ago to freelance, wanting to work from home and on projects beyond Pokemon, though she still contributes occasionally. Another director took over Gen 2 and continued directing most mainline games. A longtime staff member has been mostly absent since the late 90s but was reportedly still around the office in 2016, enjoying arcade games and mentoring younger developers. Modi still lives in Tokyo, remains friends with Tai, and works at Game Freak mainly as a supervisor. He owns a Switch and enjoys Mario Kart and Animal Crossing, but mostly plays older games. He loves cats and once painted his parents' cat after it passed away a few years ago. He doesn't draw much anymore, certainly no manga, but enjoys visiting art exhibits featuring original works from his favorite childhood manga, often standing close and staring at them. He doesn't have grand ambitions of creating something eternal words from a man nearing 60. It's been a long time since the teenager who ran away from home, dreaming of becoming a mangaka. Most artists would envy Ken Sugimori for having his art and characters famous worldwide, turned into television shows, movies, and toys being the Pokemon guy, but that wasn't the life he wanted forever. A wise man once said, "Sometimes success is unavoidable." Sugimori doesn't dislike Pokemon. He still posts Pokemon art occasionally on Twitter for fun, but also shares works like Pulseman. That's the point: the masses never experienced Pulseman or Drill Dozer, read his comics, or cared much about his creations beyond Pokemon. Yet, there's so much more to Ken Sugimori, a lifetime's worth of work waiting for fans to discover, read, play, and enjoy. To us, he's much more than just the Pokemon guy. Did you know Game Freak originally planned to personalize every copy of Gen 1? but Shigeru Miyamoto told them to make different color versions instead. In Gen 1's release, when you start a new game, it randomly assigns a trainer ID number between 1 and 65,535. This system is a leftover from when there were plans for 65,535 different versions. Last year, we spent thousands making a video series about a lost Pokédex released only in Japan in an official 1,996 book titled Pokédex, translated by Nabasa, the same person who translated the original Pokémon games. That book includes an 8-page interview with every Pokémon developer, including programmer Takanori Ota, who said they considered generating a random ID number at boot that would determine which Pokémon appeared. This tidbit sparked our curiosity. So DYKG has been translating every Japanese interview we could find, now over 100 pages. We later found more in the November 1997 issue of Famitsu 64 from Game Freak founder Satoshi Tajiri. Looking back on Pokémon's development, Tajiri said he wanted the game to be different for everyone, but it was difficult. He consulted Miyamoto and they decided to make the worlds parallel but different depending on the colored or green. This meant not only were the Pokémon in each cartridge different, but even Kanto's locations changed based on the trainer ID number. Eventually, we translated the largest Satoshi Tajiri interview ever published from May 2000 in a 600-page book called Pokémon Story. The interview is 34 pages long, and we'll release it fully later, but for now, here's a highlight. Tajiri said every cartridge was like a different world. They randomly assigned auto-generated ID numbers from 1 to 65,000 to each cartridge. Pokémon caught in those games carried that ID, so unless trading with 65,000 different people, it was unlikely to trade with the same ID. Different IDs meant Pokémon were entering different worlds when traded. Once assigned, the number never changed during the game. Tajiri talked to Miyamoto about how to make players realize each cartridge was different. Miyamoto said the idea was interesting but hard to grasp, and that if players couldn't tell by looking, it wouldn't work. He suggested changing the game's color or appearance. Tajiri was surprised he got to do that and thought it would help. So, the idea of changing colors to differentiate ID numbers was born. Tajiri wanted the color changes to be real and to add other small differences between versions. He mentioned 65,000, but the exact number was 65,535, the highest number representable by an unsigned 16-bit binary number. Currency was initially intended to compensate for the absence of PvP battles by assigning a specific monetary value to every Pokémon, allowing players to buy them in-game or trade with friends. According to the creator, the cash system was removed due to hardware constraints. Early on, players could purchase Pokémon with money, but this led to players focusing on saving money rather than catching Pokémon in the wild. They also considered making players pay extra when trading Pokémon of unequal value, but programming limitations and technical challenges on the Game Boy made it impossible to implement. Trading Pokémon was prioritized over the money system, so the currency feature was cut. A developer from the original team shared that the initial plan had shops in every town selling Pokémon, which would have allowed players to buy many if they had enough money. Though some Pokémon, like Magikarp and others at the Celadon Game Corner, are still purchasable, buying Pokémon was originally a central feature that was later removed. Early concept art even shows these Pokémon stores. Health bars almost didn't make it into the game either. Since the developers had only made action games before, they struggled with RPG design. Aiming for simplicity, they removed numerical stats wherever possible. At one point, HP was shown as text descriptions instead of numbers, with multiple status phrases to indicate health levels, but this was found uninteresting and replaced by the now familiar HP meter. Damage was initially described with phrases like, "that hurt," but that system was scrapped in favor of the standard RPG HP system. Another discarded idea was that if you lost a battle, you would lose your Pokémon permanently, similar to how kids played with collectible cards where the winner keeps some of the loser's cards. The creator initially prototyped this concept but removed it because it was too frustrating for players to lose Pokémon they had raised. The first generation of the game went through many changes over its 6-year development, and it's interesting to imagine how different the series could have been if different directions were taken. Is this conversation helpful so far? Currency was intended to compensate for the absence of PvP battles by assigning a monetary value to every Pokemon, allowing players to buy them in in-game shops or trade with friends. According to the creator, the focus on currency was removed due to hardware limitations. Early in development, players could buy Pokemon with money, but this caused players to prioritize saving money over the challenge of catching Pokemon in the wild. They also considered making one player pay money during trades if there was a value difference between the Pokemon, but programming constraints made this impossible. Transferring money within the game was complex and difficult to implement on the Game Boy, so the team prioritized enabling Pokemon trading and dropped the currency system. Additional details reveal that initially, each town had a shop selling Pokemon, allowing players to buy many if they had enough money. However, this concept was cut from the final version of the first generation. A few Pokemon, like Magikarp, Scyther, and Porygon, are still purchasable in the game, but buying Pokemon was originally a central mechanic. Early concept art shows Pokemon stores when the game was called Capsule Monsters. Even HP bars were almost removed during development since the team, used to making action games, struggled with RPG mechanics. They aimed to simplify gameplay by removing numbers and experimented with text-based HP and status descriptions, but found it unengaging, so they switched to the traditional HP meter. Another scrapped idea was a for keeps system where losing a battle meant losing your Pokemon. The original concept was inspired by collectible card games where players could win and keep opponents' cards. A prototype was made but discarded because it caused too much frustration. The first generation of Pokemon underwent many changes during its 6-year development, leading to a final game quite different from initial plans. He was eventually asked where he got that information, but never responded. To sum up, this branch of the rumor seems to be a case of information laundering. Claims are added to Wikipedia without sources. Then news sites use Wikipedia as a source, repeating the claims in their articles, which are later cited as reputable sources. Many people spreading the misinformation seem to have credible sources like the BBC, but tracing it back shows it started with someone random editing Wikipedia in 2005. This edit, along with a fake social media page, spread the rumor widely, and its appearance in a book made it seem legitimate. Checking Japanese websites revealed similar rumors, but with the same citation problems as the Western ones, meaning Japanese fans also have no reliable source. To be clear, this isn't saying the claim about the person's autism is impossible, just that there's never been confirmation and all claims trace back to dubious sources with no direct evidence or primary sources. Therefore, this rumor is considered false. Another common fan theory is that a certain creature was a failed clone attempt of another creature, essentially a scientific mistake during cloning. This theory has appeared on many websites and fan wikis and been supported by popular YouTube videos with millions of views. Supporters point out similarities like color, weight, and gender status, plus locations where these creatures are found. It's a fun theory, but doesn't hold up. There's no record of developers confirming any connection, and they've actually denied it. In 2012, a series director was asked about it, and said he'd never heard the rumor and explained that each creature is a unique living being designed individually. While the answer wasn't a detailed rebuttal, it clearly rejected the theory. Many fans rejected the director as a credible source, arguing he wasn't officially a designer, but he's been involved since before the series began and worked closely with the main creators over many years. The development team was small, and roles were mixed, with people doing multiple jobs, including design. So he wasn't just a composer, he was one of the main developers involved in design decisions. The creation of these creatures was a team effort, with multiple people contributing ideas, so there isn't a single creator of any one creature. Those waiting for a direct quote from one person probably won't find one. The director also seems to have direct knowledge of the creation process. Eventually, when asked where he got that information, he never replied. To sum up, this branch of the rumor seems to be a case of information laundering, where claims are added to Wikipedia without sources, then news sites use Wikipedia as a source to repeat the claim, and later, those articles are cited as reputable sources in new articles. Many people spreading the misinformation appear to have credible sources like the BBC, but tracing it back reveals it started with someone random editing Wikipedia. It seems this 2005 Wikipedia edit and a fake social media page spread the rumor widely, and it gained legitimacy when it was printed in a book. Checking Japanese websites showed similar rumors with the same citation problems as Western sources. Japanese fans spreading the rumor don't have solid sources either. To be clear, this isn't saying there's no chance the person in question is autistic, but there has never been any confirmation, and all claims trace back to dubious sources with no direct evidence or primary source support. So, for all practical purposes, this rumor is classified as false. Another common fan theory is that one character was a failed cloning attempt of another, suggesting scientists messed up creating one and ended up with the other. This theory is popular on several websites and fan wikis, and has been supported by many YouTube videos with millions of views. Proponents point out that the two characters shared the same color palette, shiny color palette, weight, and unknown gender. One character is said to be the first successful clone, and the other can be found in locations related to cloning in the story. While it's a fun theory and tempting to believe, the evidence doesn't hold up. There's no record of developers ever mentioning any connection between the two, and in fact, they have denied it. In 2012, the series director was asked about the theory and responded that it was the first time he had heard it, emphasizing that each character is a unique living being with its own elements and life form. Although the director wasn't prepared for the question since the theory isn't entirely impossible given the clone connection, his answer was clearly a no. Despite posting this quote publicly, many fans refused to accept the director as a reliable source, arguing he was only a programmer and composer on the original project and not a designer. However, he has been with the company since before development started and worked closely with the core team, including the original creator and other key developers, all of whom collaborated on the designs. A key planner from the original game explained that due to limited staff, roles overlapped and even programmers contributed to designs. The director was involved in all aspects throughout his career and was one of the main developers. Some fans demand a direct quote from the specific creator of the character in question, but design was a team effort with multiple people contributing and refining ideas, so there likely isn't a single person responsible. The director also seems to have first-hand knowledge of the character's creation. The facts are clear. This theory doesn't stand up. Half of the supporting evidence is false, and the other half consists of coincidental similarities shared by many other Pokemon in recent months. We've translated numerous interview pages where Satoshi Tajiri and Shigeki Morimoto give detailed accounts about Mew. You can watch our latest video on Mew's origins to hear all about it. They discuss hidden F4 phantoms and other elements, but Ditto is never mentioned. The theory linking Ditto to Mew has been around for a long time, so let's focus on a more recent rumor that Professor Ivy is a lesbian, or more specifically, that Takeshi Shudo, the original head writer of the anime, thought she was. This idea had been speculated by fans on message boards for years, but it only gained widespread attention in 2020 after a tweet by a user named Crimson, which presented it as fact. In the days that followed, various websites such as Game Rant, Flipboard, Pink News, Pride.com, comicbook.com, and numerous Reddit and Twitter threads picked it up. To show how these sites validated the rumor, here's an excerpt from comicbook.com. The information emerged from Pocket Monsters, the animation, a book written by Shudo before his death. He worked as the writer for the original Pokemon anime and its first two films, and he often shared surprising headcanons and ideas. One of these was that Shudo believed Professor Ivy was a lesbian, which is why Brock was so upset when she left him. We interviewed Crimson, the Twitter user behind the viral tweet, and he explained that he found the rumor presented as fact on a message board. He thought it must be true, so he tweeted it out, never expecting it to go viral, but it did. When fans asked for a source, Crimson told them it came from Shudo's book, The Animation, but he hadn't actually read it. After some pushback, he deleted the tweet to avoid spreading misinformation. In our fact-checking process, we read the book, which consists mostly of novelizations of the early anime episodes. starting from the first episode and ending with the showdown at Vermilion City Well before the Orange Islands and Professor Ivy's appearance. She is never mentioned. We also reviewed Shudo's personal blog, where he discusses his thoughts about working on the anime in great detail, but there's no mention of Professor Ivy's sexuality. The media outlets that spread the story did no fact-checking before publishing and never issued corrections after the fact. Crimson admitted that his tweet didn't have a solid source and felt like these websites were just after clout. Despite deleting the tweet, it continued to spread, and months later, another Twitter user named Dragonmill screenshot Crimson's deleted tweet and made it go viral again, garnering nearly 60 likes and more than 8,000 shares. Crimson warned Dragonmill that the claim was dubious, but the warning was ignored as the tweet gained more traction. We also checked with the Japanese fan community. The earliest mention of Ivy being a lesbian we found was a message board post from 2002, which was just some random users speculating without any official source. A more recent post mentioned it, but the user said they had heard the rumor from foreigners online. No one could point to an official source, and the rest of what we found in Japanese was just Rule 34 content. Fans are free to have their own headcanons, but there's nothing in the show to suggest that Professor Ivy is a lesbian, and no records of Shudo stating that he considered her to be one. We spent a lot of time fact-checking this video, but there's always the possibility that legitimate quotes from developers are out there somewhere, maybe in a 90s Japanese magazine that no one knows about. To cover all bases, we're offering a $350 reward for anyone who can provide a direct quote from Shudo or his core team that confirms any of these myths are true. We debunked 3 myths today, and we're putting ourselves on the line. The truth is, this theory doesn't stand up. Half of the supporting evidence is false, and the other half consists of coincidences that apply to many other Pokemon. Recently, we translated several interviews with Satoshi Tajiri and Shigeki Morimoto, where they go into detail about Mew. You can check out our recent video on Mew's origins to hear more about it. They mention hidden F4, phantom dogs, and other details, but there's no mention of Ditto. The Ditto Mew theory has been around for a long time, so let's move on to a more recent rumor that Professor Ivy is a lesbian. Specifically, it's said that Takeshi Shudo, the original head writer of the anime, liked to think of her that way. This idea existed on message boards for years as fan speculation, but it only gained mainstream attention in 2020 after a viral tweet by Twitter user Crimson. Over the following days, websites like GameRant, Flipboard, Pink News, Pride.com, comicbook.com, and countless Reddit and Twitter threads picked it up. Comicbook.com legitimized the rumor by stating it came from Pocket Monsters the Animation, a book Shudo wrote before his death. They noted Shudo's unexpected headcanons and desires for Pokemon, claiming that he believed Professor Ivy was a lesbian, which supposedly explains why Brock was so upset after she left him. We interviewed Crimson, the Twitter user who made the story go viral. He said he encountered the rumor often on a message board thread on Bulba Garden, NL, and thought it was true. Crimson is just an ordinary person with a few hundred followers, and he tweeted it, never expecting it to go viral. When it did, he was surprised, saying, "Oh damn." Some fans asked for a source, and Crimson pointed to Shudo's book, but he hadn't actually read it. After some pushback, he deleted his tweet, not wanting to spread misinformation. As part of our fact-checking, we read the animation book. In fact, there are 2 books, and they mostly serve as novelizations of the early anime, ending at the showdown at Vermilion City. This means the story concludes long before the Orange Islands arc and the introduction of Professor Ivy. She is never mentioned at all. To double-check, we also reviewed Shudo's personal blog, where he extensively discusses his thoughts while working on the anime. He never mentioned Professor Ivy's sexuality there either. The media outlets that spread the story didn't fact-check before publishing, and they never issued corrections. Crimson admitted that his tweet didn't have solid sourcing, and it seems these websites just wanted to gain attention from something that may not even be true. Crimson's deleted tweet continued to spread the rumor. A couple of months ago, another Twitter user, Dragonmills, shared a screenshot of Crimson's deleted tweet, making it go viral again. gaining almost 60,000 likes and being shared more than 8,000 times. Crimson warned Dragon Mills that the claim was doubtful, but the warning was ignored as the tweet gained traction. We also looked into the Japanese fanbase. The earliest mention of Ivy being a lesbian we found was from a 2002 message board, where users were just speculating with no official sources. A more recent thread mentioned it, with the poster saying they heard it from foreigners online. No one could point to an official source, and most of what we found in Japanese was fan-created content. Fans can create their own headcanons, but there's nothing in the show suggesting that Professor Ivy is a lesbian, and there's no record of Shudo saying he thought of her that way. We spent a lot of time fact-checking this, but there's always a chance that legitimate developer quotes are out there somewhere, maybe in an obscure late 90s Japanese magazine. Still, we're confident in our findings. To ensure no stone is left unturned, we're offering a $350 reward for anyone who can provide a direct quote from Shudo or his core team confirming any of these myths. Today, we've debunked 3 myths, so we're holding ourselves accountable. If it ever comes to more than $1,000, the quote disproving our claim will be posted in the pinned comment under the video and also shared on Twitter. Originally, instead of badges, Pokemon trainers nearly traveled around collecting belts, inspired by East Asian martial arts. The first gym leader would have given players a white belt, and the final one a black belt. Game Freak even considered allowing players to use them like whips, similar to a lion tamer. To uncover rare Pokemon facts for this video, significant effort was made, including translating 100 pages of a Japan-exclusive book by Game Freak developer Akihito Tomisawa, which is where this fact originates. In the book, Tomisawa writes that the development team thought humans should have ranks as monster trainers. As Pokemon gained strength, players would receive colored belts like martial artists. The developers discussed using these belts as training whips in red, black, or yellow. However, they eventually decided this was too cruel, and the player's relationship with their Pokemon should be more like a pet owner, so the belt idea was scrapped in favor of badges. Despite this, whips were still included. Trainer Red originally had a whip in beta versions of Red and Green, and other trainers' whips made it into the final version of Generation 1. Another story uncovered in the translations involves Pokemon creator Satoshi Tajiri giving away a copy of Pokemon Red, where the player's name was Dumbass. In a 1997 issue of Japanese magazine Famimaga 64, Tajiri told the interviewer that he had been buying used Pokemon games from second-hand stores and noticed interesting player and Pokemon nicknames. On one Red cartridge, the player named themselves Dumbass, possibly so the game would display "Player is a Dumbass" in the menu. Tajiri had made custom versions of Red and Blue with homemade stickers, which he shared during the interview. He gave one to the interviewer and offered the other along with 5 autographs as prizes for readers. He also agreed to give away the Dumbass Red cartridge, hoping the winner didn't erase the save file. The next fact relates to fossil Pokemon. In a 34-page interview from the 2000 book Pokemon story, Tajiri explained the inspiration. As a child, he caught bugs in rural Japan, but his hometown was later urbanized, with nature replaced by buildings and an arcade he often skipped school to visit. Pokemon combined these two experiences, catching bugs and video games. The lesser-known detail is that during the construction in his neighborhood, many fossils were found, causing delays. Tajiri and his friends visited the site to dig up fossils themselves. Later, a school trip to the Izu Islands inspired Cinnabar Island. The entire Kanto region was based on his childhood environment. Even its size reflected how far he could ride his bike as a kid, around 10 kilometers. He said biking expanded his world, and he wanted Pokemon to reflect that grounded, real-world exploration. Later in the interview, he shared that the world in Generation 2 was based on how far he could travel by train. If we ever reach over $1,000, we'll share the counterquote that refutes our own in the pinned comment below this video, so everyone can check it out, and we'll also post it on Twitter at DigUGaming without the G. Did you know that instead of badges, Pokemon trainers were originally meant to collect belts, inspired by East Asian martial arts? The first gym leader was supposed to give you a white belt, and the last one a black belt. Game Freak even considered allowing you to use these belts to whip your Pokemon like a lion tamer. For this video, we went to great lengths to ensure that the facts we present are ones you probably haven't heard of, with around 99% of you likely unaware. One thing we did was translate 100 pages of a Japan-only book written by Game Freak developer Akihito Tomi SAU, which is where this first piece of information comes from. In the book, Tomi SAU explains that the development team initially thought Pokemon trainers should have ranks, with belts that signified a Pokemon's strength, much like martial arts. It's fascinating how theories like this can spiral into widespread belief, especially when they're backed by fan enthusiasm and viral social media moments. The Ditto Mew theory, in particular, has a long history of speculation, and while it's definitely intriguing, it's clear that the developers' input and detailed behind-the-scenes interviews contradict it. As for the Professor Ivy rumor, it's a great example of how misinformation can spread. It's easy for a small kernel of an idea to be picked up, expanded on, and misinterpreted, especially when there's little concrete information to either confirm or deny it. It's even more slippery when the rumor starts being presented as a fact by someone who hasn't verified their own sources. Crimson's admission that they didn't even read the book really drives home how these things can snowball. It's interesting to think about how fan theories and rumors, even when they're later debunked, can shape the broader conversation around a franchise. What's your take on fan theories in general? Do you enjoy diving into them, or do you prefer just enjoying things as they are? Following the iconic trio of Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres, this particular decision emphasizes the cultural importance of Pokemon, which has inspired individuals in science, art, and many other fields. Described as rare and elusive, these creatures are comparable to the legendary Pokemon in the games. Naming real-world animals after Pokemon shows how the franchise's themes of discovery and biodiversity extend beyond its fictional world. Interestingly, these beetles are as enigmatic as the Pokemon they are named after, being found in secluded habitats, with little known about their behaviors and ecological roles. This connection between real-world science and Pokemon lore highlights the idea that the Pokemon world of exploration and awe isn't so different from our own. Celebi, the time-traveling Pokemon introduced in Gen 2, underwent significant design changes during development. Early concept art depicted Celebi inspired by Kokopelli, a Native American fertility deity associated with music, spring, and mischief. Kokopelli is often depicted as a playful figure carrying a flute and bringing renewal. Although this influence enriched Celebi's design, it was ultimately discarded, likely to avoid cultural misrepresentation or controversy. The final version of Celebi, designed by Hironobu Yoshida, emphasizes its role as a guardian of nature and time, with a delicate, fairy-like appearance that aligns it with other mythical Pokemon like Mew. Next, we dive into a fact from the 1997 Famima 64 interview we mentioned earlier. One of the questions Yuki asked Tajiri was about the creation of Porygon. Tajiri explained that Porygon was made to be ironic, a response to those who said it was too late to create a Game Boy game. Tajiri recalled, "At the time, I didn't see anyone playing Game Boy anymore, and it had lost popularity. I was at the barber when someone asked me what kind of game I was making. I said it was for Game Boy, and the guy replied, 'The Game Boy? You're a bit late for that.' People kept telling me to make polygon-based games for next-gen consoles, but I was designing Pokemon for Game Boy, where 3D graphics weren't possible. So I thought it would be ironic to make a Pokemon called Porygon. Adults get the irony, but kids, don't they just think it's a cute Pokemon? Later, when they get familiar with computers, they'll realize it was meant to be ironic." Tajiri went on to say that Pokemon contains many terms kids won't understand until years later, and if you're one of the fans realizing now that Porygon was meant to be ironic, let us know in the comments. Our next piece of info is about how Pokemon was originally planned to be a much smaller game. Pokemon's producer, Shigeru Miyamoto, didn't even want it to be an RPG. Red and Green launched in 1996, but Tajiri pitched the idea to the Nintendo subsidiary Creatures Inc. back in early 1990. with a deadline to finish by October that year. Creatures had been working on a similar game called Toto, which was about filling a Game Boy with creatures, but they cancelled it out of respect for Tajiri when they saw his idea. In a book by Tomisawa, Creatures chairman Satoru Ishihara mentioned that Creatures had its own creature collecting game in development, but when Tajiri presented Pokemon, which featured monster catching and trading via a link cable, they decided not to pursue Toto anymore. Tajiri's small idea eventually grew much larger. As he later explained in another Japanese publication, "We initially thought we could finish a Game Boy game in 6 months, but our ambitions for Pokemon kept growing, and we realized it would be tough to develop that quickly." Despite his fondness for the idea of collecting and trading monster, something that worked perfectly on the Game Boy, Miyamoto didn't think Pokemon should be an RPG. The original voice actor for the character Ash was named Casey during her audition, and the name Ash was likely chosen to match the series' tree-themed naming pattern. Pikachu's voice was provided by Japanese voice actress Ikue Otani, even in the English version of the show, though sometimes an American voice actress would fill in for additional takes. The character of Brock was eventually removed due to concerns that his appearance might be seen as a racist stereotype, particularly because of his eyes. In his place, the team created Tracy, a character with a more European appearance, to avoid any stereotyping. Later on, Tracy was replaced by Brock after the team realized that no one found Brock's appearance offensive. Many fans expressed a desire for the original trio of Ash, Misty, and Brock to reunite, but one of the directors, Masamitsu Hata, explained that Misty would never return as a permanent character. Hata stated that Misty's continued presence would limit the opportunity to introduce new female characters, and that changing female characters kept the show fresh and offered new appeal for male viewers, with the ability to change outfits or showcase different aspects like swimsuits. Hata also explained that the creators did not want Ash to ever become a Pokemon master, as doing so would signal the end of the series. Instead, they planned to keep introducing new challenges, badges, areas, and Pokemon for Ash to encounter. Hata further explained that after the early seasons, the show became more culturally neutral to accommodate its international success. For example, in later seasons like Best Wishes and XY, Japanese text was replaced with a set of custom symbols that could be translated into either English or Romanized Japanese, making it easier to localize the show while maintaining a sense of uniqueness. Despite the show's success, it faced major controversy early on, particularly after the episode Electric Soldier Porygon aired, leading to around 700 viewers being hospitalized due to seizures, headaches, and other symptoms. This incident, known as Pokemon Shock, resulted in the episode being banned and the show being put on hiatus for 4 months. The cause of the issue was the use of rapidly flashing red and blue lights in the animation during a scene where Pikachu uses an electric attack to destroy missiles. The show also faced criticism for certain plot points that remained unexplained, such as how Ash caught so many Tauros despite never visiting the Safari Zone. One episode that addressed this was never aired in America due to its controversial content, including scenes with a character pointing a revolver at Ash and the others. Another controversial episode, Beauty and the Beach, featured James cross-dressing and wearing inflatable breasts for a beauty contest. This episode was heavily criticized for sexual innuendos and inappropriate content for children, resulting in it being banned for several years in the US. A modified version of the episode, titled The Lost Episode, was eventually broadcast. The character Jinx also sparked controversy for resembling offensive depictions of black people, leading to her eventual redesign with purple skin in both the games and the show to address the concerns. Jinx's appearance was removed from certain episodes, and one episode featuring her prominently was not aired in the US at all. Additionally, after the 11th of September attacks, 2 earlier Pokemon episodes were pulled from circulation. One of these, The Tower of Terror, was believed to have been removed because its title could have evoked memories of the tragedy. Is this conversation helpful so far? The original voice actor for the character Ash was named Casey during the audition. The name Ash may have been chosen to align with the series' tree-based naming theme. Pikachu's voice was provided by Japanese voice actress Ikue Tani, even in the English version of the show, though sometimes an American voice actress would voice Pikachu if additional takes were needed. Brock's character was eventually removed from the show because the creative team feared his appearance might be seen as a racist stereotype, primarily due to his eyes. To avoid this, a new character, Tracy, was introduced with a more European appearance. Later, Tracy was replaced by Brock after realizing that no one was offended by Brock's appearance. Fans of the original characters Ash, Misty, and Brock wanted them to reunite in later seasons. However, one of the show's directors, Masamitsu Haka, revealed that Misty would never return as a permanent character because her presence would limit the team from introducing new female characters. He explained that switching out female characters allowed for new appeal to male audiences and that the female characters could be more flexible with changing outfits and accessories like swimsuits. The creators also decided never to make Ash a Pokemon master. Haka stated that if Ash were to achieve this goal, the show would end, and that new badges, areas, and Pokemon would always be introduced to extend the series. Haka also explained that as the show gained international popularity, it became more culturally neutral, especially in the later seasons like Best Wishes and the XY series. Japanese text was replaced with a custom set of symbols that could be decoded into either English or Romanized Japanese, making the show more universally understandable and easier to localize. While the show was a success, it faced a major controversy after the Electric Soldier Porygon episode, which caused hundreds of viewers to suffer seizures, headaches, and other issues due to flashing lights. This led to the episode being banned and the show going on a 4-month hiatus. The animation technique in the episode, where Pikachu uses an electric attack to destroy missiles, created rapid flashing that caused the health issues. In the original season, several plot holes were left unexplained, such as how Ash caught so many Tauros without visiting the Safari Zone. There was an episode, The Legend of Dratini, that intended to cover these gaps, but was never aired in the US because it contained scenes with firearms, which were deemed inappropriate. Additionally, Meowth in that episode wore a mustache similar to Hitler's, further adding to the controversy. Another banned episode, Beauty and the Beach, contained inappropriate sexual content, including James cross-dressing with inflatable breasts for a beauty contest, which led to its ban for over 3 years. The episode was later edited for US audiences. The character Jinx also faced controversy due to its resemblance to racist depictions of black people in the 20th century. Initially, Jinx was shown in its original form, but due to complaints, its design was changed to purple in later episodes and games. After the 11th of September attacks, 2 early Pokemon episodes were removed from circulation. The Tower of Terror, likely due to its title, evoking memories of the attacks, and Tentacool and Tentacruel, which was also pulled without an official explanation. The episode was pulled due to its content, which featured a giant Tentacruel attacking the city and a character using an automatic weapon. While the episode was temporarily removed, a shot of the Tentacruel hitting a skyscraper was still kept in the show's opening. This episode was also pulled briefly after Hurricane Katrina, as it depicted a city flooded by damage. The popularity of the Pokemon anime led to over 20 movies, with one of the earliest, Movie 3, initially planned to have a very different story. It involved a real-world T-Rex and explored the fate of real animals in the Pokemon world. Writer Shudo Teshi wanted to introduce real animals, questioning why real trees and flowers exist but no real animal. The story would have involved scientists discovering a T-Rex fossil that came to life, wreaking havoc, and eventually making its way to Ash's hometown. Ash, his friends, and Team Rocket would attempt to stop the rampaging dinosaur. However, the dinosaur would be stopped without a clear explanation. At the time, no new Pokemon had been introduced, and Pokemon Gold and Silver were still far off, leaving only the original 151 and a few Generation 2 Pokemon revealed. This idea was ultimately rejected, as it wasn't seen as appealing. After his script was turned down, Mr. Shudo went home and drank to cope with the rejection. A few days later, he was shown designs for 4 new Pokemon, including Entei and Unown, which would form the basis for a new movie aimed at promoting Pokemon Gold and Silver. The concept for Pokemon Detective Pikachu actually stemmed from a rejected idea for the anime. Early on, the staff wanted Pokemon to speak full sentences, but Game Freak, the developers of the original games, believed Pokemon should not speak at all. The compromise was that Meowth from Team Rocket would be the only Pokemon to speak human language. However, many staff members still wanted Pikachu to talk. The initial idea for the 3 deciseconds version of Detective Pikachu was simply to have a talking Pikachu expressing emotions. A tech demo in 2013 showed a motion-captured Pikachu talking to its audience. Game Freak was initially reluctant to allow this, and producer Hiroyuki Janai spent a lot of time convincing them. Even Pokemon Company president Tsunekazu Ishihara was unsure about the project when he discussed it on Japanese television. However, the game turned out to be a success. In April 2016, movie studios could bid for the rights to make Pokemon films, fueled by the success of Pokemon Go, which caused Nintendo's stock to rise by $9 billion. Legendary Pictures won the rights over Warner Bros. And Sony, a notable victory since Legendary is owned by the Chinese company Dalian Wonder Group, and there had been historical tension between China and Japan. Universal Pictures was initially set to handle distribution outside Japan and China, but on the 25th of July 2018, it was announced that Warner Bros. Would distribute the film instead. This marked the first Pokemon film Warner Bros. Distributed since Pokemon 3. There was speculation that this was part of a larger deal between Legendary and Warner Bros. After their contract with Universal expired in 2018. With the rights secured, Legendary quickly moved forward with the movie's production to capitalize on the Pokemon Go craze. The Pokemon Company decided that Ash Ketchum would not be the protagonist, as he had already been fully developed in the animated series and movies. They wanted a new character to take the lead. Rumors suggested that Max Landis, who wrote the script for the 2017 film Bright, might write the screenplay, while others speculated that Nicole Perlman, known for Thor and Guardians of the Galaxy, and Alex Hirsch from Gravity Falls might be involved. Is this conversation helpful so far? This theory just doesn't hold up. Half of the supporting evidence is false, and the other half is just coincidental similarities found in many other Pokemon. We've translated numerous interviews with Satoshi Tajiri and Shigeki Morimoto where they discuss Mew in great detail, and you can check out our recent Mew Origins video for all the information. They talk about hidden F4 phantoms, dogs that don't exist, and other details, but never mention Ditto at all. The Ditto Mew theory has been around for ages, so let's move on to a more recent rumor that Professor Ivy is a lesbian, specifically that the original head writer of the anime, Takeshi Shudo, liked to think of her as one. This idea had been floating around fan message boards for years, but it wasn't until 2020 that it gained mainstream attention after Twitter user Crimson made a viral tweet presenting it as fact. Over the next few days, it spread to sites like GameRant, Flipboard, Pink News, Pride.com, comicbook.com, and countless Reddit and Twitter threads. For instance, comicbook.com wrote that the rumor surfaced in a book called Pocket Monsters, the animation which Shudo wrote before his death. The article claimed that Shudo believed Professor Ivy was a lesbian, which is why Brock was so heartbroken when she left him. We interviewed Crimson, the Twitter user who made the story go viral, and he said he often saw the rumor presented as fact in a Bulbapedia forum. He thought it must be true and tweeted it, not expecting it to go viral, but it did. After getting some pushback and realizing the information might not be true, Crimson deleted the tweet. As part of our fact-checking process, we read the animation book. There are actually 2 books, and they mostly just retell the early episodes of the anime, ending before the Orange Islands and before Professor Ivy even appears. She's never mentioned. We also checked Shudo's personal blog, which contains over 20,000 entries where he discusses his work on the anime in detail, and there's no mention of Professor Ivy's sexuality. The news outlets that promoted the story didn't fact-check before publishing and never posted corrections afterward. Crimson told us, "My tweet admittedly didn't have a solid source, so it feels like these websites just wanted to gain clout with something that may not even be true." Even though Crimson deleted the tweet, it continued to spread. A couple of months ago, another Twitter user, Dragon Mills, screenshot Crimson's deleted tweet and made it go viral again, getting almost 60,000 likes and being shared over 8,000 times. Crimson warned Dragon Mills that the claim was dubious, but his warning was ignored as the tweet continued to spread. We checked with the Japanese fanbase, and the earliest mention of Ivy being a lesbian we could find was from an old message board in 2002. It was just random users speculating, with no official sources. In a more recent thread, someone mentioned hearing the rumor from foreigners on the internet, but no one could point to an official source. Most other content we found in Japanese was fan art or Rule 34. Fans can have whatever headcanon they like, but there's nothing in the show suggesting that Professor Ivy is a lesbian, and no record of Shudo saying he thought of her that way. After spending a lot of time fact-checking, we're confident in our research, but to leave no stone unturned, we're offering a $350 reward to anyone who can provide a direct quote from Shudo or his core team that proves these myths are true. We've debunked 3 myths today, so we're putting our research to the test. After the movie's announcement, some longtime fans of the franchise were doubtful about the realistic portrayals of Pokemon, particularly Pikachu being able to speak. While the more lifelike designs were appreciated by some, others found them unattractive compared to the series' original, simple and cartoonish style. Concerns about the film's reception were alleviated when test audiences gave positive feedback in January 2019, 3 months before its release. It was then revealed that Legendary Studios had already begun working on a sequel. According to Hollywood Reporter, the studio hired Oren Uriel, known for his work on 22 Jump Street and the upcoming Sonic the Hedgehog movie, to write the script. Uriel has yet to comment on his involvement in the new Pokemon film. Additionally, in January, the cover reported that 2 new Pokemon movies were in development. One would be a spin-off centered on Mewtwo, but not related to the upcoming Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution, and the other would be a live-action adaptation of Pokemon Red and Blue. Legendary plans to expand on the game's story with a live-action and CGI depiction of Red's journey through the Kanto region. Both of these projects are believed to be set within the Detective Pikachu universe, suggesting that Legendary is planning a cinematic universe for live-action Pokemon films. This theory gained further traction when one of the Detective Pikachu producers hinted at it in March 2019. Producer Ali Mendez told IGN that the Pokemon franchise offers countless possibilities and that after the first movie, they would explore more of the world, including featuring many of the 800 Pokemon. With such positive early reception, Detective Pikachu looks set for success. The film's opening weekend box office is expected to reach around $100 million, placing it alongside several Marvel films in terms of financial performance. The cold reality is that this theory simply doesn't hold up. Half of the evidence supporting it is incorrect, and the other half consists of coincidental similarities shared by many other Pokemon. Recently, we translated several interview pages where Satoshi Tajiri and Shigeki Morimoto provide detailed insights about Mew. Check out our Mew Origins video for more. They discuss elusive F4 phantoms, non-existent dogs, and other specifics, but Ditto is never mentioned. The Ditto Mew theory has been around for ages, so let's move on to a more recent rumor that Professor Ivy is a lesbian, or more precisely, that the original head writer of the anime, Takeshi Shudo, thought she was. This idea had been circulating on message boards for years as fan speculation, but it only gained widespread attention in 2020 after Twitter user Crimson made a viral tweet presenting it as fact. The rumor quickly spread, being picked up by websites like Game Rant, Flipboard, Pink News, Pride.com, comicbook.com, and many Reddit and Twitter threads. To illustrate how these websites legitimized the rumor, here's what comicbook.com wrote. The information surfaced in Pocket Monsters, the animation, a book written by Takeshi Shudo before his death. Shudo worked as the writer for Pokemon's original anime and its first 2 films. He had previously shared his surprising headcanons and desires for Pokemon, and it seems one of them has come to life. What is it? Shudo believed Professor Ivy was a lesbian, and that's why Brock was heartbroken when she left him. We spoke with Crimson, the Twitter user who made the tweet go viral. He explained that he had encountered the rumor presented as fact on a message board, and thinking it was true, he tweeted it out. Crimson is just an average guy with a few hundred followers, and he didn't expect the tweet to go viral, but it did. This led him to say, "Oh damn." While many fans were excited by the news, a few asked for a source. Crimson told them it came from Shudo's book, The Animation, though he hadn't actually read it himself. After receiving some pushback, he deleted the tweet, realizing it might not be true, and wanting to avoid spreading misinformation. As part of our fact-checking process, we read the book. There are actually 2 books in the Pocket Monsters, the animation series, and they mostly consist of novelizations of the early anime, ending with the Vermilion City showdown. The story ends well before the Orange Islands and before Professor Ivy even appears. She is never mentioned. We also combed through Shudo's entire blog, which includes over 20,000 entries, where he discusses his thoughts on working on the anime. There's no mention of Professor Ivy's sexuality. The news outlets that spread the rumor didn't fact-check before publishing, and they never issued corrections afterward. Crimson admitted that his tweet didn't have a solid source, feeling that the website simply wanted to gain attention from a story that may not even be true. Despite deleting the tweet, the rumor continued to spread. A few months ago, another Twitter user named Dragon Mill shared a screenshot of Crimson's deleted tweet, causing it to go viral again, earning almost 60,000 likes and over 8,000 shares. Crimson warned Dragon Mill that the claim was questionable, but his warning was ignored, and the tweet continued to gain traction. We also looked into the Japanese fanbase, and the earlier suggestion that Ivy might be a lesbian came from a random message board in 2002, where users were just speculating with no official source. We found another thread where someone mentioned the rumor, but they said they had heard it from foreign fans online. No one could provide an official source, and most of what we found in Japanese forums was explicit content. Fans can have whatever headcanons they want, but there's no evidence in the show that suggests Professor Ivy is a lesbian, and no record of Shudo ever saying he thought of her that way. We spent a lot of time fact-checking this, but there's always a chance that legitimate developer quotes could exist somewhere, maybe in an obscure 1990s Japanese magazine, but we're confident in our research. To leave no stone unturned, we're offering a $350 reward to anyone who can provide a direct quote from Shudo or his core team that proves any of these myths are true. Today, we debunked 3 myths, so we're putting ourselves on the line.